This is the Marcy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. It's a medium security prison housing more than 800 inmates. I've actually been in there before, but not for a crime, but during a tour during my sociology class back in college. And this prison, along with the psychiatric center across the street, houses some of the state's worst offenders. Which makes sense. I mean, driving around, you can see this place is pretty isolated. These inmates have access to vocational training, a substance abuse program, a library, a gym, even a football field. But what they don't have is the internet. The question is, should they? To understand why America's prisoners don't have internet access, we first have to learn about America's prison past. But first, I have to leave because I'm starting to get these suspicious looks. Okay, we're good now. The US has had some form of imprisonment since the earliest colonies were formed. Over the years, the prison system grew across each new state that was added. And these early prisons were extremely punitive. The view was that inmates had to be instilled with strict discipline. So there was widespread abuse and torture, prison labor by day, and solitary confinement by night. In the South, prisons also served the purpose of holding slaves who ran away from plantations, or as breeding pens, where slaves were systematically forced to produce large numbers of children to be sold. It was awful. But after the Civil War, the US entered into the progressive era, and the prison pendulum swung away from punishment and towards rehabilitation. By the 1970s, inmates received education, vocational training, community correction programs like probation and parole. But in the 1980s, the pendulum swung again. It was the war on drugs, and across the entire country, tough-on-crime policies were passed left and right, which saw a dramatic increase in the prison population by over 500%, along with a huge shift in attitude from rehabilitation to punishment. Ever since then, prisons are now back to being places where criminals have to be held accountable for their actions. And the point is to intentionally make their lives harder as a consequence for what they did. This translates to less freedoms and less access to things that the rest of us have access to, like the internet. While nearly all Americans have access to the internet and rely on it so much that it's essentially a necessity for modern life today, nearly all incarcerated Americans don't have that same access. In federal prisons, inmates are only able to use a system called True Links, which only allows them to send monitored emails to their lawyers or family members. In state prisons, there is a bit more access available. Some states provide inmates with these free tablets, but inmates can only use a certain number of apps on the tablet, just to send emails and read some books that are pre-approved. And the tablets are not entirely free. If they want some add-on like music, inmates or their families need to pay the company that manufactured the tablet. A company called JPay, which makes millions of dollars every year from these tablets. The fact that there's a private company that even makes a profit from the prison system is a whole other issue I'm not going to talk about right now. But still, in the vast majority of states, inmates are denied internet access. The reasons for this denial are obvious and supported by a large percent of the population, who asks, why should we allow someone who's a convicted murderer or offender to be able to use a technology where they could find potentially new victims? And why should someone who's convicted of a violent crime be allowed to live in taxpayer comfort in prison instead of dealing with consequences for their actions? Those are valid concerns, but there's also concerns with what happens to inmates if they don't have internet access. The United States sticks out among other developed nations with a significantly higher recidivism rate. This means that the vast majority of American prisoners are back in prison within 5 years. Two factors that are crucial to getting that recidivism rate down is jobs and education. Prisoners who participated in job training programs are 24% less likely to reoffend. And those who participated in educational programs are 43% less likely to end up back behind bars. For both of those two proven ways of tackling recidivism, the best tool we have at our disposal is the internet. Think about it. What's the first thing you do if you want to find a new job? You search it online. And most of the time, the application is online too. And since the majority of prisoners have been in prison for 10 or more years, they've completely missed out on decades of digitization. They might not even know how to find or apply to a job online. Not to mention the complete loss of education for incarcerated students. When I was touring the Marcy prison, I saw the educational programs that were offered. It was for welding and plumbing and mechanics, but there were no online classes like the ones students took during the pandemic. If an inmate can spend their years of prison to complete an entire college degree, by the time they're released, they can actually become contributing members of society. Of course, there is valid concern for certain uses of the internet that should be limited. For example, social media for offenders. But is it possible for us to create an internet which gives inmates the information they need to rehabilitate while limiting access to platforms that are dangerous? The answer is yes, but for us to see that, we have to go on the other side of the ocean. I don't have the time to go to Europe right now, so let's use the next best thing. This is Beveren Prison, right outside of Antwerp, Belgium. And it's the first prison in the world to create a prisoner-specific internet called Prison Cloud. It allows inmates to access a version of the internet that resembles the World Wide Web we use. They can watch movies and listen to music. They can play computer games, order items online, communicate with prison staff and see their records. They can even find jobs that they can apply to once released. The Prison Cloud system automatically blocks access to any sites that it registers as potentially dangerous, like Facebook. But even something like adult films are given access to, including to sex offenders. An inmate convicted of abuse of children is allowed to watch children's shows on TV. If that sounds like a little bit too much access, let's see how the deputy director of the prison explains it. If you say you're a murderer so you can't watch television anymore because it's too violent for you, that's short-sighted. We watch murder every day on our television. I don't approve of murder, but I watch it. The goal of prisons like Beveren is to blur the lines of what life looks like inside and outside of prison, so that when inmates are released, the outside world is not a shock to them. Touring Marcy Prison in college and driving around it today, I couldn't help but notice that this prison built in 1989 looks and feels almost identical to a prison in 1889. Yes, some of the conditions have gotten better, but both prisons seem to be built with the same motivation behind it: to take those who have committed crimes and remove them from the rest of society as punishment for what they did. Our world has expanded exponentially with new technology since 1889, but prisons haven't. Maybe new digital technology is the answer to finally bring prisons to the 21st century. A century where we could fundamentally reshape how we approach crime and incarceration. Or as the Beveren prison director says it, these people are living in the same society as we do. Society changes, prison changes. Thanks for watching this video. I would say it was fun to make, but honestly, I got kind of scared filming at the prison because the officials were kind of looking at my car as I was filming. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribing is the best way to make that possible. There's a lot of ways that new computer systems are interacting with our social systems, like the new push of using AI to create smart prisons. That's definitely a topic I'll cover at a later video. But for now, if you liked this video, make sure to like and comment. I'll see you in the next one.